I developed a list of professional values early on in my career, and I set out a map for myself of where I wanted to be 40 years from now. I had a plan. I was a constantly courageous self-disruptor. I never rested on my laurels. The research shows that somewhere between 24 and 36 months, most of us gain mastery over the role that we're in, and subconsciously, we begin to be unchallenged, and other people see it in ourselves before we see it, and then we look complacent. And so I constantly disrupted myself every few years and fired myself in the job I had and moved on, way beyond my skill set, way beyond my confidence level, often beyond my competence level. But it's why I gained control over my career, because I did not want anyone else deciding it for me when I wasn't in the room.
So today we have, hailing from Salt Lake City, Utah, Scott Jeffery Miller. And if you don't know Scott, you know his work and who he advises, because Scott is the former EVP of Thought Leadership and the CMO for, drumroll please, FranklinCovey. He is an Wall Street Journal best-selling author of several books on leadership, and he is a special advisor to many different companies. But rather than me tell you about Scott with two T's, let me welcome Scott Jeffery Miller. Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Dr. Patty Ann, thank you for the spotlight. Thank you for the platform. What an honor to be here on your podcast today. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. It's always intimidating when you have a clinical psychologist who's also an expert professional coach that's interviewing you. So I'll be on my best behavior.
Oh, okay, Scott, flattery will get you everywhere for all my listeners. They know that. All right, so I know you have a new book that you want to talk about, but before we do, tell me, there's so much noise out there. Everybody thinks they're a leadership expert. Everybody thinks they know what mentoring is. Everybody thinks they know what coaching is, right? Everybody and their grandmother. So what is it about who you are and what you do that differentiates you from the pack?
Well, because I'm not a great leader. I spent 3 decades as a leader in the world's most influential leadership development company, the FranklinCovey company. Mm-hmm. And my entire career was 2 steps forward, 1 step back. See, I don't believe everyone should be a leader of people. And it's a little bit controversial in the industry.
Sure.
I believe that not everyone should be an anesthesiologist. Not everyone should be a commercial airline pilot. Not everyone should be a leader. The problem, Dr. Patty Ann, is, as you know, with most organizations, the only way to get promoted is to lead people for the most part. Mm-hmm. And so organizations lure phenomenally productive, high-performing individual contributors, like I was, to become the sales leader, to become the leader of the dental hygienist in the office, to become the leader of the creative team, and we often implode. Leadership is about developing relationships. That's the business you're in. And not all of us are expert at that. Some of us are introverts, some of us are shy, some of us are impulsive.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you and I'm going to challenge you.
Please.
I'm going to challenge you. Okay. I get the analogy, everybody shouldn't be an anesthesiologist, right? But how do you feel about the thinking that leadership can be taught and therefore everybody can be a leader based upon, say, John Maxwell, right? Who's one of the most influential leadership authorities in the world. And you just said leadership is relationship building. Definitely. His definition is leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less, and that it can be taught. So what do you think?
Well, it's a complicated topic, but let me address what you said.
Sure. Let's get complicated.
Leadership can be taught, but so can open heart surgery. And I don't know that what it would take for me to become adept at being an open heart surgeon is worth my time, is a distraction from what my natural talents and passions are. So yes, leadership is about influence, but you also can be an informal leader and have influence. But the fact of the matter is, we know most of us that have careers in leadership, it's not about that. It's about holding people accountable. It's about giving people high courage feedback on their blind spots. It's about having intense conversations that may end in a termination. It's about coaching people, reinforcing and giving directing feedback. Leadership is very difficult. I love John. John and I are friends. I've interviewed John. John is a very aspirational leader. And at the end of the day, when you are a leader of people and you have to hit your third quarter goal, or you're going to have to reduce staff or you get fired, there are very difficult demands on you that require you to do more than just influence. Most people are not comfortable having high courage conversations that require them to move outside of their comfort zone and discuss the undiscussables. My point remains, everyone leads at some point. You lead yourself, you lead the culture, you lead a project. That's very different from having 12 direct reports that you're responsible to ensure that their contribution drives forward your company's goals.
Why is it very different? What's so different about it?
Because I can be an individual contributor in a meeting and have an idea to where there's no consequence. The CEO is not holding me accountable. The board of directors isn't holding me accountable for margin or EBITDA or cost of goods or inventory turns. There's a massive difference between an individual contributor who has a contribution to the culture, which is important because one person can be a toxic, depleter of culture in a team.
Mm-hmm.
Leaders have to model everything. Everything you want to see in your team members as the leader, you have to model. No gossip, punctuality, self-awareness, high courage feedback, make and keep commitments, deliver on your promises, tell the truth, don't spin. On and on and on. It's an enormously important and demanding job. Not everyone should be a leader of people.
Okay, so how did you learn all about leadership?
Oh my gosh.
You started off in real estate development, right?
Well, yeah. So as a young kid, I was involved in some political campaigns at the local and at the national level.
Like 5 years ago?
Like 35 years ago. Thank you. Sweet of you. And then I went to work for the Walt Disney Company. They were the hometown company in Orlando.
Well, hang on a second. I'm sorry. Did you sneak in there as a young kid you worked for political campaigns?
Multiple, correct, including at the presidential level.
You've got to tell us the inside scoop on that. Like, just stop right there. What the heck is going on in those campaigns? Like, you with all due respect, and this is nobody personal, with the right campaign, you could nominate Mickey Mouse.
That's sad, but probably true.
Right.
When I was in high school,
I ran with someone that has your savvy.
Well, I hope that the American public is more educated than that, but I understand why you would say that given the political climate.
No, but I'm not talking specific. I'm talking about marketing strategy, and I don't think I think the political arena marketing is like, you could take a giraffe and market it, and people think it's a fish. It's unbelievable.
I can challenge you on that. Michael Bloomberg ran for the Republican nomination 4 years ago and fizzled out on the night of his first debate after he'd spent tens of billions of dollars on the campaign. So I do think that marketing only takes you so far. I started my career in politics as the student body president.
Actually, there's a lot more. There's a lot more to that conversation, but I know what you're saying.
There is. Yeah, of course there is. I was privileged to work on the Bush Quayle campaign back in '86.
Potato.
Yep, that got elected in 1988. I worked on several Senate campaigns, House and Senate. I'll tell you, I have been privileged to work for some very credible politicians that were servant leaders, that were public leaders.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure some of your listeners and viewers will have their own opinions, but I spent 3 years with then Vice President George H.W. Bush and then Senator Quayle. And I don't know that I've ever met a finer human being than what then became President George H.W. Bush.
So my question was, because I don't want to get political because we don't want to alienate people, but what was it about the leadership aspect?
He was kind.
Kindness. So
he was honest. He was self-aware. He treated people with respect. He didn't call people names. Some politicians have to have some level of strategy and dirt. They usually farm it out to their political team so they can wear the white hat and others wear the black hat. But he represented an era of where public service was noble, where people served because they genuinely wanted to make society better. They wanted to diffuse conflict. They wanted to raise people up. They weren't going to please everybody. Their tax policy and their growth policy is not going to please everyone. They were just gentle women ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. I understand there's a big debate on gender, but I love that quote from Ritz-Carlton. It's their mantra, ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And I think there was an era where I served where that was the prevailing theme.
So that was your takeaway on leadership, working on political campaigns?
Honestly, yes. I mean, I can give you lots of takeaways, but by the way, I have supported members of the opposite party. I have voted for members of the opposite party. So I'm not one or the other exclusively. I have a predilection. But I would
suggest today, from back then till now, I think everybody can agree that the world is suffering from lack of leadership.
Because the people that we see that we claim to be our leaders, especially in the political arena, have brought unconscionably debased behaviors to the conversation, name calling, mocking, lying, disputing facts, providing alternative facts, personally attacking opponents. It's repugnant. And it has set a standard that is outrageously low for what we all think leaders are. And we have to stand up and say, enough is enough. This is not acceptable. Leadership is about modeling trustworthiness. You cannot talk yourself out of a problem you behaved yourself into. You can only behave yourself out of it.
And I'm sure our listeners will remember that line from the FranklinCovey, because I read that many, many times, and I love it. So let's just shift away from the politics to the leadership today in the business world, right? There seems to be a lack of that as well. And I will, as a true capitalist, now I don't care if people don't like that statement, true capitalist, right? I think that the compensation range from the top person to the lowest person is so out of control. And I think it influences leadership. But you've worked with some of the best companies in the world. What do you think about that? And I think it impacts leadership.
I think two things. I think it's a false narrative to try to compare what a CEO makes versus what her frontline employee makes. Now, if someone's making, $7 billion in a public company, which they're usually not, it's outrageous. I too am a capitalist. I think you get paid for the skills that you bring to the organization.
Sure.
Is a CEO's skills 8,000 times what the person who's cleaning the floors are? Probably not, but it's a different conversation.
Sure.
What I want to address.
But do you think it influences the ability to lead? I guess is my question.
I think it influences morale. I think it influences engagement. And so, yes, to your point, yes. But what I'd like to address is the first part of your question, which I do think leadership is improving. I think the goodness that
nowhere to go but up.
Well, this is true. But I do think we should focus on what is working well also, which is, I think, the silver lining of the pandemic, which was devastating to a million lives lost and tens of millions of people who lost their family members and their careers and their companies. The silver lining that came out of Black Lives Matter movement or the social justice movement. The silver lining is people aren't accepting bad, boorish behavior in companies anymore. Leaders are getting fired on the spot.
Do you think that's, I do think there's a lot of silver linings from COVID. Do you believe in that? I never looked at it. You think that is one of the silver linings? I do. I never looked at it that way.
Yeah, I think a silver lining is that people are choosing to live their values. They realize life is fragile. You don't get to decide when you stop living, but you do get to decide how you live. And I think there's a massive generational sea change of what people are willing to tolerate, right? They realize that they want dignity. They want respect. They need to be held accountable. They
want a life.
Results. They want a life outside of work. That's true. And as Americans, we tend to live to work, unlike most of society.
Yeah, the hustle culture. Right.
The hustle culture. But I do believe that organizations have had to dramatically change the way they groom and promote leaders, because no longer are people willing to tolerate poor leadership. They'll either one, quit, or B, they will sue you. And they will take you down if you have allowed a leader to behave in an unethical or unmoral way. So I have seen a a massive change in the standard that companies are willing to tolerate with their leaders. Now, I think the pendulum has swung a little far in terms of the employee base sort of, taking over the company with their demands. That's swinging back quite quickly. You can't have a capitalist economy and not have leadership holding people accountable.
Yeah, you can't have the inmates running the insane asylum.
I didn't want to use that phrase, but in essence, yes, that's true. But I'm very encouraged about the amount of dollars boards of directors and executive suites are funneling into mentorship and leadership. Let's face it, this human resource phrase that leaders create engagement, it's not true. It's total bunk. Everybody's measuring engagement. You can't create engagement. What you can do is create the conditions whereby people choose a high level of engagement on their own. I can't force you to be engaged. I probably can force you to be disengaged, but you want to create a culture where people choose to bring their best to work every day, independent of what your own goals are. No one has ever increased my level of engagement other than the conditions they set where I decided to give more, and give more on my own choice. I do think it's a silver lining.
Mm-hmm. So how are companies doing that? And how are you doing that? Right? Because, and to your point from earlier, like what will happen is a company the best salesperson that might be is an awesome salesperson, right? If they're the best, they get promoted. They know nothing about leadership.
Yeah.
Zero.
Yeah. What I see across the hundreds of companies that I consult with, present to, interview, talk with are several things. And I'm not being a Pollyanna, right? I mean, I'll share horror stories, both in my own leadership. I think by and large, I'm seeing the following, Doctor. I'm seeing executive suites listen to the employee base more.
Absolutely.
What do you need? What do you want? What's important to you? How do we stay in business and earn a profit for our shareholders? Which, by the way, we hope the employees are also shareholders. How do we earn a profit? But how do we also do good? How do we build society? How do we not strip the earth of the resources? How do we be a good steward in our industry? Companies are listening more. I think they're being much more deliberate with how they promote their leaders. Here are our values. Here are our standards. You may not violate them. And then training the leaders to behave in accordance with those values. They aren't just, on a poster in the lobby of the wall. I see that across the country. I see organizations investing in professional development, leadership training, productivity training, how to execute. Companies know that the average tenure of an employee now is about 18 months. I mean, I worked for FranklinCovey for 25 years. My father worked for Lockheed Martin for 32 years. Those days are by and large over. Yeah. So if you want someone to stay in your organization, you've got to give them a reason. What is their promotability? What is their career track? What kind of resources are available for them to learn new skills? How do they grow and learn and educate themselves?
Scott, not to go into a rabbit hole, but I actually thought it was more like 18 months to 3 years, the tenure.
Yes.
What do you account for that shift other than the obvious, the young kids, I say young kids, aren't going to put up with stuff that probably we and our parents shouldn't have, right? So
yes, but you're right. You're right. The outlier is 36 months. The younger you get on the employment chain, if you will, the shorter the tenure is.
Okay.
I mean, it's very clear. Values have shifted, meaning when you and I were 16, we were first in line to get our driver's license. We were driving by 8:31 in the morning. You now have 19-year-olds that have never driven a car, don't own a car, don't care, and it's called Uber or a scooter they rent on their smartphone. So values have shifted. That's not a bad thing.
What is the shift what is that value shift, right? What you just described, because I am amazed. I remember you would count down the days to be in 16. And I'm like, oh, I see kids now. You're excited to get, not really. You're 19, you're 20 years old.
Yeah, I don't think it's all a bad thing. I think it's just they value perhaps connectability more, right? They have more options. And that's the second point, is they have more options. When you or I were raised, we had like 4 options, right? Mow a lawn, go bag groceries, work at a summer camp, or be a lifeguard. I mean, there were not a lot of options. Now
and babysit. I used to make a lot of money babysitting.
Babysit. Yeah. Now you can open an eBay store, an Etsy store. You can be a social media influencer. You can do all kinds of things. I have a friend who's young, who's earning $15,000 a month being a TikTok influencer, and not on shady stuff. Like They've got some content out there. So I think, doctor, I think it's just people have options. When you ask people that quit their jobs on your team, someone comes in and says, hey, I'm giving my 2 weeks notice. And you say, so where are you going? And they say, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. You say, no, it's okay. You can tell me where you're going.
Yeah.
No, really, I don't know. They don't know. They might open an Etsy store. They might open an eBay store. They might freelance.
That does blow your mind.
It blows your mind because we wouldn't have thought to quit our jobs before we had an offer letter signed and we were ready to go. And so I don't think it's all a bad thing. What I think it's doing is it's crippling companies that have their employees as hostages. You build a culture.
Most of them had in the past.
That's right, because that's what we knew as well, how we were raised.
Command and control. Command and control.
If you build a workplace of choice for achievers with heart, people will likely choose to stay. If people are leaving your company in droves, you have to ask yourself why. Because I'll tell you, and this may sound simple, I'll bet you'll challenge it. People don't quit leaders who love them. People quit bad jobs and corrupt cultures. They do not quit leaders who they feel care about them and want to grow and nurture them.
No, I 1,000% agree with you. I will say something that you might challenge me on. Understanding that it's not the be all and end all, but how you pay people matters. Money matters.
It does to certain people. There are some
to a
people,
certain extent.
There are some people who, by the way, I am like you, an unabashed capitalist. My number one professional value is maximizing my income. That's my number one professional value. Not so much that I'll go work for a hedge fund and make 20 million and hate my job. But some people's values are different. Some value the emotional paycheck. Maybe they're not the breadwinner in their family. Maybe they want to find purpose. Maybe they want to contribute greatly. But you're right. You have to ask your employees, what are your professional values? What is most important to you? Some want upward mobility. Some want a chance to work internationally. Some want a title. Some want income. Some want stock options. It's why post-pandemic, doctor.
Yeah, until recently, they never were asked. Because I remember I've done mentorship programs too. And I'm saying, well, what do they want? They're like, we don't ask them. It's like not genius.
You're right. I think my biggest insight I'll offer you on this topic is up until the pandemic, I think we had a culture still happening in companies where one size fit all, meaning whatever your leadership style was, you implemented on the team and people had to cleave to that. And
just
now,
like our educational system has been, one size fits all.
That's right. It's 2023, and my kids are still learning algebra. They're never going to use algebra a day in their life. I'm sorry.
It's still an agrarian calendar. Nobody's going home to pick corn at 2:00 or all summer long. But that's a different conversation.
Post-pandemic, leaders have to adjust their style and individualize it to everyone on their team, like parenting. Right?
Do they know how to do that? Does anybody know how to do that?
I don't think innately.
I mean, that's where you come in.
It is. It's why the leadership industry is helping leaders understand empathy and better communication and better prioritization and better listening skills and be more patient.
My wheelhouse.
Not to coddle your people, because you can still be an individualized leader and say, Patty Ann, I need to know how best to work with you and inspire you. I want to make sure that our relationship is great, so that you can deliver on all the commitments you're going to make and we're going to hold you to delivering on. And I think a lot of people see it as swinging the pendulum so far where all you're doing is mollifying your employee. No, Patty Ann, if you work for me and you're in sales, you still owe $110,000 of gross revenue every month with this product mix. That is not changing, or you can't work here.
It's still deliverables.
That's right. And I'm not changing those. So let's talk about what's expected here in the workplace in terms of activity and behaviors, and what kind of leadership do you need from me within reason to make sure I can help ignite the genius in you so you can blow through those goals.
So what do you feel about the companies that use personality tests for that?
Well, unlike you, I'm not. Yeah, unlike you, I'm not a clinical psychologist, but I'm well steeped in those instruments.
Yeah, I don't think they're the be all and end all either. But a lot of people. I think
they serve a purpose, right? Gallup's work on StrengthsFinder and Myers-Briggs and Enneagram, anything that can make Patty Ann and Scott work better together. If it brings value, it's great. If I know you're an architect in terms of an archetype, or whether you're, a strategist or your competition, the more I know about what drives you, what shuts you down, the better. Because at the end of the day, when you put everyone's technical skill set aside, they have to be in the business of developing relationships, building trust, diffusing conflict, figuring out how to work well together. That is the superpower. We used to call them soft skills. The superpower everyone needs to bring to the workplace is being able to work well with people that are different than you are.
What do you think, Scott, is, other than what you just said, what is the biggest misconception that you have to have people unlearn about leadership?
I think it's assuming bad intent. I think we should all assume good intent to people. People don't wake up in the morning and decide to come and wreck the culture today. People don't wake up in the morning and say, gosh, what nasty gossip can I share today to screw so-and-so? As you know, as being a psychologist, people behave the way they do for reasons. Typically their parents, their headmaster, their rabbi, whoever raised them and modeled their behavior as a child. I think people have to know that they're in a safe environment. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to say things they regret. They're going to do things that are incongruent with the company values, and that you want to coach them. I think as a leader, you have to ask yourself, so why is Patty Ann doing that? Why is she shutting down in meetings? Why is she doodling? Why does she have to be the first person to always raise her hand and answer? Why is she never talking in meetings? Why does she never sit next to Tina?
So it's the curiosity factor.
It is. It's like understanding Patty's got innate genius in her. How do I ignite it? How do I bring it out? How do I create a culture where she feels confident and safe to bring her ideas? Not everything she says is going to be implemented. Not everything she does is going to be rewarded. I'm not going to praise her at every turn. I'm going to validate her very specifically with certain behaviors so that she knows I'm her champion. I think leaders need to understand people behave the way they do for reasons, and your job is to do your best to figure that out and ignite their genius in the workplace. And the opposite is true. For all of you that are not leaders, you need to be a little more forgiving of your leader. They are under immense pressure. They don't have a PhD in leadership. You have no idea what it's like to lead 9 people that all have different personalities, few of which are even remotely self-aware about what it's like to lead them. I think the workforce can be a little more forgiving on the pressure that their leaders are also under.
Well, if you want to use the workforce as symbolic for people in general, I think we are at a point where people are very, very unforgiving, very, very intolerant of people that are different from them. And I think what you were saying about the leadership piece, and to, people wake up, give them the benefit of the doubt, is what you said.
Yes.
That reminds me of when the book talking about the old concept of leadership was earn my trust. Now it's you give trust until somebody proves themselves to be untrustworthy.
Yes.
How do you see that play out in leadership? Because honestly, some old middle-aged white guys are like, that's bull. I'm not going to trust anybody until I know they're trustworthy.
Well, they're going to either be forced out or leave the workforce very quickly, because I'm an old middle-aged white guy.
I know, that's why I said it.
I'm very clear on this. When I speak to an audience, doctor, I'll say to people, raise your hand if you're trustworthy. Every hand goes up.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Yeah.
And I say, no, put your hand down. Who decides if you're trustworthy? It's the other person. You have to behave yourself into a reputation of being trusted by others. Now, how do you do that? What I said earlier, make and keep commitments, honor promises, don't gossip, don't speak disparagingly about people behind their back, listen more, on and on and on. You have to behave yourself into a reputation of being trusted. And by the way, Patty Ann may have a different standard for how she's going to trust me than someone else does. And so I think as a leader, you've got to understand, I mean, the currency of your business is whether or not you're operating at the speed of trust, whether or not you've laid a foundation of trust. You offer apologies. When you say something that is inappropriate, you stop and you say, Patty Ann, I got to stop. That was rude. What I said was inappropriate. I'm embarrassed. I apologize.
That will go such a long, like you just said it, like you threw it out there. That it could make all the difference in the world for your relationship with somebody.
Because everybody is watching, and you ought to say it very generally. In fact, some of the best words are, I'm embarrassed. I don't know why I said that. It was not appropriate. I apologize, not just to you, Patty Ann, but to everyone in this room. Don't give any excuses. Don't say I was under pressure. Don't say I meant it as a joke. Just say, I was wrong. That was rude. Wrong. I apologize. I'm embarrassed. Would you please forgive me? And 9.5 times out of 10, everyone's going to say, that was big of you. Now, don't do that 8 times a meeting, because then you're just a fraud manipulating people. You know what? Right. The culture is so tense right now. Everybody's so worried about what words you can use and what phrases you can use and what gender you are, what gender you now are today, and what you can and cannot say, and what is disparaging, what might be a colloquial phrase that was rooted in some deep racial hatred. Institution. Yeah. And as a leader, you've got to know you're going to make mistakes. As leaders, we are in communication mode. We're influencing, we're persuading, you're talking a lot. You're going to make mistakes. In fact, you ought to have that conversation. Sit your team down and say, I want to build a culture here where everyone enjoys coming to work. I want to build a culture here where people's careers are safe and can grow. And to do that, we have to deliver. We have to over-deliver on our commitments. I'm not perfect. I wasn't born a great leader. I'm going to say and do things that are going to offend some of you. I'm going to say and do things that are going to inspire some of you. I want to build a culture where everybody here can both feel vulnerable and be transparent, say what is on your mind, and also take responsibility for your own contributions. That requires me to be self-aware. It requires you to be self-aware, and requires us sometimes to pre-forgive each other, because we're all going to say and do things that each of us will find offensive. The more we learn, the better we do. So what I'm going to ask is that each of us set a pre-forgiveness culture. And if someone does or says something that is especially violating of your values, take them aside respectfully. Do not shame them in public, including if it's me. Take them aside, educate them on why you find that inappropriate. Let them digest it. Let them learn and grow and mature and move forward.
We love that. Pre-forgive. Like that. I love that. Pre-forgive. Okay, so you've been so kind, but I know you're chomping at the bit to talk about your newest book, in spite of all the ones behind you there. So I want you to talk about the ultimate guide to mentorship. And I've worked with companies. I've created mentorship programs. I'm amazed at the companies that don't have. I think there's a difference between having a formal mentorship program and an informal one. Why did you pick mentorship out of all the other aspects of leadership that you could write about? Go. Unabashedly go. Promote yourself. Tell us how smart you are and why we should go out and get your book.
Doctor, thank you for answering that question. I spent my entire career in leadership. A company that I worked with had a mentorship program, 50 mentees, 50 mentors. Mm-hmm. The mentor was a gentleman in his 50s that ran the travel division. He was an expert. One mentor? He was the mentor.
Only one mentor?
No, sorry. 40 mentees, 40 mentors.
Oh, okay.
This one particular one, the mentor was a 50-year-old man who was a travel director. He ran the travel division. He was a savant at travel. If you wanted to know which room in the Ritz-Carlton in Singapore to book, he knew exactly which one. I mean, savant, right? Ran a multi-million-dollar travel division. He was paired with a young woman in her 20s that was a marketing coordinator in the federal government division. I don't know how they were paired. He would call me weekly. That's my mentor call. What do I do? I mean, she wants to know this and this and the other, and I don't know how to do that. I'm over here in the travel division. I've got 4 employees. I have no idea. And he would call me weekly. And I don't think it worked so well. She ended up leaving the company, not because of him. But I remember thinking, he is such a competent leader and expert in his industry, but he has
Yeah.
no idea how to mentor because all the skills of leadership do not always translate well into mentorship. Great leaders don't make great mentors. And so I thought, you know what? I can train anyone to be a great mentor, regardless of your age. I'm often asked, doctor, about reverse mentorship. And I say, there's no such thing. Mentorship is age agnostic. It's called mentorship. I believe there are 13 roles that mentors.
By the way, before you go further, I have to say this. That reminds me of it. You might disagree. It drives me crazy when people say, let's reimagine. It's redundant. You're imagining. Why do you need to reimagine? So I understand what you're saying about the mentorship. Mentorship is mentorship is mentorship.
Mentorship is mentorship. So my research, I identified 13 roles that mentors play. Sometimes
I'm going to want to know which, I'm going to want to know the most important one.
Well, sometimes they underplay them. These are roles like the boundary setter, the challenger, the navigator, the flagger, the distiller, the connector. You don't play them all. But I wrote this book because HarperCollins said to me, we think the world needs a practical mentorship book. You mentioned John Maxwell, our mutual leadership icon. John writes amazing books. I find them often a little bit aspirational, a little bit illustrative. And my book is very much a complement to what John writes. Say this, don't say this. Think this way, don't think this way. Here's 8 ways to consider framing that. Very specific. Of the 13 roles, there's...
You're right. The Maxwell books do tend to be theoretical.
They do. And that's all deference.
I say sometimes theoretical.
Yes, very much so. But we also can say that with respect to the enormous contribution John has made to the world. There's 2 roles that I'm especially passionate about. The first one is role number 2. I call it the boundary setter. And as a clinical psychologist, you, of course, have expertise on this. I think the most important role a mentor plays entering the relationship is setting the boundaries. And it goes something like this. Patty Ann, very excited to be in this mentoring relationship with you. I know we're both going to learn from each other. I think it's important to have a bit of an awkward conversation first. 3 minutes of awkward conversation. We'll go back to non-awkward in a moment. First, Patty Ann, I want to remind you the role that I believe a mentor plays. I'm going to ask that neither of us confuse mentorship with sponsorship, allyship, or championship. My role is not to be your ally or champion. So please don't confuse that role. My role is to take all the mistakes and the successes I've made in life and marshal any wisdom that I can toward the goal that you identify and are trying to accomplish. That's my job. Second, I want to make sure that you don't confuse mentorship with me being your realtor, your mortgage broker, your banker, or your lender. My job...
Or your shrink.
My job is to do what I said I'm going to do. And then lastly, I guard my connections professionally and personally with great care. I'm a very abundant person, but because I do this and that does not mean that you're going to have access to them. So please don't put either of us in the uncomfortable position of asking me to introduce you to Jennifer Lopez. It's not going to happen. So I set very high boundaries early on. And then, Patty Ann, I sit back and watch. And I watch, does the mentee respect them? Do they come on time? Do they make and keep commitments? Are they prepared? Are they punctual? Do they overpromise? And I watch them. And after 5 or 6 sessions, Patty Ann may knock my socks off, and I might choose to lower my boundaries because you've earned them. Or I might choose to raise them because you're a train wreck and you don't appreciate that my time is
Hang on one second. Everything you're saying, I love. I will tell you an aspect that I added to the mentorships programs I've created. Pretty much what you said, but you said it much more eloquently, right? Setting boundaries. But I also make it, well, tell me if you agree with this, very clear that the mentee has a role too and a responsibility, and they have to respect your time. Okay, go ahead. You put your hand up.
To your point.
Okay.
The last part of that conversation is, thank you for listening. Now, I'm going to guess you have some boundaries for me also.
Okay, so this is the first conversation. This is the first, you're not going to wait.
Conversation. Okay. Yeah. Now, typically, the mentor-mentee relationship is one of disproportionate influence. Generally speaking, more seasoned, older, wealthier, more educated, and they're in a position of inherent power. I think it's important for the mentor to say, and Patty Ann, thank you for listening to those 3 boundaries. you may also have some boundaries for me. I want to know what they are, and you may not know what they are right now, but if some develop over the course of the next day or two or week, I'd love to have you share them with me because I want to make sure I'm sensitive to anything that might be a trauma or a concern in your life. Now, most mentees aren't going to say, yeah, I have 7 boundaries. You can't, right? Usually not.
Yeah.
It should work both ways. Let me move off that for a second. That's I think the most important entry.
Well, I do want to ask you, who do you believe, and you can work this in, but I do want to know who you believe who sets the agenda.
Oh, the mentee does. 100%.
Thank you. Because
100%.
my experience has been that the mentee comes and is like, all right, what are you going to teach me? Like,
yes, no.
This is your career. You are accessing me. I can't tell you what you need from me. Okay, just want to be.
You and I are in violent agreement, which is why the second role is the boundary setter. But the first role, doctor, is the revealer. Okay. And that means as the mentor, your job is to act like an archaeologist or a paleontologist. You come in and you sort of brush away the sand and the dirt, and your job is to help uncover,
right,
so that your mentee can discover and name what it is they're trying to accomplish. They want to become a vice president. They want to pivot out of the company. They want to open up a cupcake shop. They want to figure out how to get an international assignment in any company in the world. How do I do that? Your job is to help your mentee articulate what it is they're trying to accomplish. And then you use your wisdom and your own journey to help them accomplish that. It's a slippery slope because, like parenthood, many mentors end up living vicariously through their mentee and they become the visionary. And this one is counterintuitive. The visionary is number 8. And I think, doctor, when most of us hear about a visionary, we think of people that are charismatic and we're bold and creative. And what if we did this? And what if we did that? And how about this? And did you ever think about that? And why don't you run for Congress? And why don't you write a book? And why don't you do it? And what can happen is visionary mentors can sink their mentees because often your vision is based on what you want to do, what you can do, not the talents, the passions, the traumas, and the fears of what your mentee thinks they should do. Mm-hmm. So you've got to be very thoughtful when you're in the role of visionary that you are creating a vision for what your mentee can and should do. Because I don't know about you, Doc, but I have many times with good intent, but irresponsible outcomes lured someone in to a speech in front of 8,000 people or to launching a business. And they never should have done that because they weren't prepared. It wasn't their passion. It was mine.
Right.
And much of the book is written to mentors to make sure you're being a great steward of your mentee because most of them will want to match your energy and your vision. They're intimidated by you, by the power differential. They'll want to become you. And you've got to make sure that you're not turning them into someone you wanted to be, not someone they want to be.
And, it's interesting, and I'm being so cognizant of the time, but I think that is the same pitfall for parenting. It's not that different, right? You think you know what you want for your child's future because you know better, you know them, you know their personality. And there are so many miserable so many people miserable in their careers because they didn't choose it. It was chosen for them. And I think that's true. What happens at work as well. And people are offered opportunities for growth or promotion, but it's not really something that they want. And they feel like they have to do it.
The most offensive but insightful phrase I've ever heard is, you're never in the room when your career is decided for you. And when I heard that, I thought that is so gross, but true.
It's true. It is true.
Everyone needs to recognize, is your career accidental? Is it episodic? Is it full of just serendipity? Or is it deliberate? Is it intentional?
Intentional.
And the best way to build a deliberate career is to identify your professional values. By the way, those are different than your personal values. Mm-hmm. You have to have 2 lists so you know when they're in conflict and why, and to self-disrupt. I've had a remarkable career, right? From the front line to the C-suite of a global public company. And when people ask me what was my key, I'll usually say three things. One was I developed a list of professional values early on in my career, and I set out a map for myself of where I wanted to be 40 years from now, back when I was in my 20s. I had a plan. Second
So you
is
reverse engineered it.
was very deliberate. Now, I had serendipity, but it wasn't the theme of my career. It was an outlier, serendipity. I moved to London versus Australia. It happened and it was great. Second is I always had the benefit of leaders who believed in me more than I often believed in myself. Not everyone has that, but everybody can have the first and the third. And the third is I was a constantly courageous self-disruptor. I never rest on my laurels. The research shows that somewhere between 24 and 36 months, most of us gain mastery over the role that we're in. And subconsciously, we begin to be unchallenged and other people see it in ourselves before we see it. And then we look complacent. And so I constantly disrupted myself every few years and fired myself in the job I had and moved on, way beyond my skill set, way beyond my confidence level, often beyond my competence level. But it's why I gained control over my career, because I did not want anyone else deciding it for me when I wasn't in the room.
I love that. And, I always tell people, growth, you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And every time I hear about the disruption, I always forget the name of the psychologist, Jean-Pierre or somebody, that talks about deliberate disruption. And the best example is, and if anybody's that, under 35, they probably never even heard of Kodak. I mean, Kodak actually discovered digital, whatever the heck it is. And they said, no, we don't want to go there. It was like, when Ford developed the car, right? We'll just make a faster horse. So, all right. Two quick questions. And then one more after that. Okay. What is, other than your own, what's the last book you reread and why?
So as you may know, I'm privileged to host the world's largest weekly leadership podcast. We publish 100 episodes a year. So about 15 books come to my house a day from publicists. I frequently reread the leadership book Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. I think it's the best leadership book written in the last decade. Liz Wiseman is a former executive at Oracle. She identifies the concept that our job is not to be the genius in the room, but the genius maker of others. And she identifies 9 accidental diminisher tendencies that most of us are diminishing people in our stewardship, but it's done accidentally. We're not sociopaths. Most of us, the vast majority of us aren't sociopaths.
But there are 1 or 2 out there.
1 out of 2?
No, there are 1 or 2.
Oh, there's a lot. Oh, and disproportionately in leadership, because sometimes it takes you to be a little bit self-serving. And so, anyway, you get the point. She identifies 9 accidental diminishing tendencies: the perfectionist, the pace setter, the always on, the idea person, on and on. And they're usually strengths that are overplayed in leadership, and they end up accidentally diminishing people. And when you can understand which of those 9 accidental diminishing tendencies that you gravitate towards because they're naturally strengths, but when overplayed, diminish people, that's when you can become a multiplier of talent. Phenomenal book, Multipliers.
I love it. And I think what it's
Also
saying,
a great parenting book.
I think what you're saying is your leadership genius is more often than not to step back and let it unfold, as opposed to you pulling the sled. All right. And what is the one song that you cannot live without?
Oh, Gloria Estefan's "Get on Your Feet, Get Up and Make It Happen."
Oh, I love it.
It's my mantra.
Why?
Oh, because if it's to be, it's up to me. I am a insane self-starter. I'm a highly interdependent person, but I'm going to reap the results that I invest. There's no such thing as overnight success. I mean, there are outliers. It usually ends up, it's either ill-gotten or fleeting. But like you, doctor, everyone we interview, their backstory, no one knows. It was their 6th book that became the best-selling book. It was their 70th speech that moved them from $5,000 to $50,000. It was their 8th business. And so Gloria Estefan's "Get on Your Feet, Get Up and Make It Happen."
I love it. And what you just said, what I always coach with is that, the most important person in your career, you just look in the mirror. That's the person responsible for everything. We can all blame, and it will get you nowhere except exhausted. So I love that. All right. I want you now, Scott, to unabashedly promote yourself. I want you to tell people where they can go to learn more about you, to buy your books, plural. Go.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. My website is scottjeffrymiller.com. You can buy all my books on all retailers around the world. My books are translated to multiple languages, both in print, digital, video, and in audio. This most recent book is called The Ultimate Guide to Great Mentorship. You can visit greatmentorship.com, where I also have an online certification program, 90 minutes, very affordable, easy for companies to implement. And you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, everywhere. And I host 2 podcasts, On Leadership with Scott Miller, that releases every Tuesday and Friday, audio and video like yours. And another podcast that releases on Thursday called C-Suite Conversations with Scott Miller. What a great interview. Thank you for your spotlight today.
You're welcome. And what do you do with all that spare time?
I parent 3 boys and try to keep my marriage together.
That's great. Scott, I could literally talk with you for hours. I so appreciate all of your wisdom, all of you come from such a place of abundance. You shared so much. And to all the listeners here, I beseech you to go out and get this ultimate guide to mentorship. You are getting in a book 30 plus, I'm being kind, 30 plus years of wisdom and experience from Scott Jeffrey Miller.